we're pretty good.
So, I want to ask you a tough question, and I don't like getting into politics and religions in these videos, but given the subject matter of Morningstar, would you define it as religious work?
No, 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 no. And to be honest, I feel like I almost have to use disclaimers when people of faith stop on my table at comic conventions because I don't want them to think that it is neither a Christian comic book nor an anti-Christian comic book. It's taking the idea of Lucifer's fall from heaven into like mythology and telling it a different twist on that story. But if anything, it's a philosophical action adventure tale that's sort of also a meditation on evil. But it's definitely not, while it deals with the most religious of Judeo-Christian themes, I would not call it religious fiction because I don't think that it's. See, the thing is, sometimes people will do stories that deal with religious concepts and they feel like they're trying to take the piss out of religion, trying to say, aren't all people faith foolish? Or
I need you to speak up again. You're kind of fading.
um, some texts might take try to take the piss out of religious faith and try to point out some of the absurdity of believing in some higher power that have a very atheistic agenda. While other stories might be trying to push a religious agenda, something kind of like the Left Behind series. And again, like, to put it, I'm not trying to have a religious agenda. It's more like I'm trying to tell what I think is an interesting story. Like, I'm not a person of faith, but I respect all other people's religions. That said, I think there's a lot of really interesting mythology. That's just the word I'm going to use. A lot of mythology to be mined from the Bible, from the Torah, from the Quran. I think there's a whole variety of concepts you can tell very interesting narratives in different time periods or set the time periods it's actually taking place. And you can use those to reflect on our modern world. That isn't to reflect on it with judgment. It's simply to show a mirror and narrative and show connections between ideas that humanity as a species has had at different time periods compared with how we look and think about things now. So no, it's definitely not. And then the other thing is that I don't want to. I've had people that were people of faith that bought the book and then told me later on they read it and they enjoyed it. I'm concerned because some of the things that are going to happen later on in the series, because I don't want. It's definitely when you told people you're doing a book about Lucifer and he's the main character, you're going to take it down some dark paths. But I never want it to come off as an anti-Christian text. I don't want that to be what's happening in the story. But it's a lot more about philosophy than it really is about religion.
Well, I can definitely relate to a lot of that because my next story that I'm hoping to get back on track with, it's going to be called The Dagar Legacy. And it takes place in 14th century Europe. It's going to feature vampires, but religion does play a part in it. And I'm an atheist. I mean, there's no shocker there. But one of the toughest challenges that I have is that, well, it's not so tough for me, but I imagine that, let me collect my thoughts here for a sec. The Catholic Church does play a part in the story. And I'm hoping that people don't think that I'm basically saying that the Catholic Church is evil in the story. It's not like that they're the bad guys in the story. But you actually have to look at history during this time frame to really understand where I'm starting from. And I'm hoping that people won't just say, well, you're an atheist and you're saying all these bad things about the church. And it's like, it's in history. I'm starting from a standpoint of history. And if anything, I'm trying to say that, yeah, these things happen, but it wasn't everyone, that there was still a lot of good people out there. Because I do believe that, even with religion, that yeah, there's a lot of bad elements out there, but generally the people themselves are good, and they truly believe in doing these good things, even if the people higher up in said religion are doing bad. And that's kind of a challenge that I'm dealing with right now, is that, I have to stay true to history, but at the same time, I don't want to make it a political book about my atheism. I just want to tell a story within the universe itself.
Well, I mean, it is a fine line to walk, but I'd also say, just in terms of just general pop culture and films that I've seen over the course of my lifetime, the ideal or the narrative of a person who's within a structure that claims to be good, and that there are elements at the top that are bad. There's a person within that structure who's still fighting for good. That's a theme that continues to resonate. So I mean, that right there, I don't think people necessarily. Well, I can't speak for some of the things. And I certainly shouldn't try. But I think it's a very relatable concept, whether you are or aren't a person of faith. And and it's funny because, like, now that we're down the religion rabbit hole, the whole place where Morningstar started with me was I was going through a period of I was debating. I was raised in a religious household, and my parents still are. We still have I have a very good relationship with my family. I personally am not a churchgoer. It's just not where I ended up, philosophically, theologically. But I was definitely going through a period of full-on atheism, and the big crux of that story came out of the idea of Lucifer. How does someone who is omniscient, i.e. God, e.g. God, someone who's omniscient, create a creature that ends up becoming evil? And if he's omniscient and he knows what he's going to be, then how can that person be blamed for being what he is? He was created to be evil. And it's just like the height of hypocrisy to me that someone would be damned for being what they were created to be. And the short story that evolved was basically it was a much shorter story. It was just a gunfight between Lucifer and his followers and, like, the archangels of heaven, with them throwing him out of heaven. And it came down to Lucifer was just angry and enraged because he felt like, I'm just what you created me to be, and now you're throwing me out, and it wasn't even necessarily, his rebellion wasn't like trying to take over heaven per se. It was more like he had just opened a saloon and it was general fuckery, sort of being a little just dark. But we were like, well, there's no place for that here. We're throwing you out. And the whole story was about him being cast out and him being angry at being cast out. And at the climax of that short story that I wrote was a moment, a conflict between Michael and Lucifer, and Michael actually tells him that just because God knows what you're going to do, that doesn't mean you didn't have a choice. You might have known what choice you were going to make, but you still actually had the ability to make a choice, because he couldn't condemn you if you didn't actually have a choice. You did have a choice in the things that you made. And what that answered for me in my head was that it really doesn't matter whether a person is or isn't religious. And that's probably why I'm more agnostic as opposed to full-on atheist, because I do believe the world is more complicated than we know. And, science can't account for everything, but I certainly don't believe in any of the major religions of the world. I don't fall into those worldviews. But the answer to that short story, writing that short story came from me, was that it doesn't matter what you believe in terms of what religion you ascribe to. What matters is the choices you make. You can be an atheist, you can be an agnostic, you can be Jewish, you can be Christian, you can be Muslim. What matters is how you treat people and what you do and what you say. And he was being damned for the choices he made, not for what he was. And after that, I was sort of like, it kind of solved my crisis of faith that I was having about, atheism, agnosticism, coming from a Christian background. At that point, I basically solidified the worldview I have now, which is I don't really care what people believe. I just try to treat everybody nice. That's it. That's really all that matters to me. But in completing that short story, I thought to myself, well, if in fact Lucifer was created to be this bright angel, the brightest of all the angels, this perfect being, what led him to the decisions that he made that caused him to be cast out? And that is the seed of the current conflict that I'm writing and drawing, was how do you become evil? How did he end up there? What led him there? What planted his seed? And that's what I'm exploring and researching, currently writing and drawing.
I was thinking of a scene from Serenity when you were saying about, it doesn't really matter so much about your belief, but your choices. And I was thinking of the scene where Book was dying and he says to Malcolm, I don't care what you believe in, just believe in something. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're saying. And I just really like that scene.
It's a great scene. I've actually only seen it once in the theaters, but it was funny. I saw it before I watched the series. Like I missed Firefly when it was on, and then after watching Serenity, I was so astounded how great of a job they did of creating a full and rich narrative for someone who had never seen the TV show. I'm like, well, now I got to go back and watch it, and fantastic. So.
And what was your response to seeing the series after the movie?
It was a very positive response. I'm trying to remember, because it's been a few years now since I watched the series as well. But I'm somebody who does not. I don't mind watching stories out of order. I don't mind knowing the ending of a story and working backwards, like watching something like Pulp Fiction, or watching like Lost, or there's a TV show that was on NBC briefly called Flash Forward, which had a whole bunch of people that were telling stories out of order. For me, it was more like, that's a really interesting question. I don't know how to explain it. It was like I was getting all the backstory to the film after seeing the film, because it's like I knew everything that it was leading up to. But it was really interesting to get these kernels of things that I already knew what the result was, but not knowing how they got there. So in a way, it was kind of like watching Lost. That's I think would be a good way to explain it.
Okay, so let's see. Let's look for the next question, because you've answered a lot of these questions, which I love, but then I kind of have to figure out which question to ask you next. So I think Morningstar sounds like a really great story, and I'm hoping maybe one day I just happen upon it and read it. I definitely buy it to support you, but it's like I'm not a comic book fan, but I like the story concept. Have you ever thought of, if maybe this story does become successful, of doing a novelization of it? Not necessarily yourself, but maybe outsource someone else to do it? Has that idea ever crossed before for any of your work?
Well, honestly, I've never really thought about novelizations so much. Mostly, I've thought of it more as developing it in TV and film. And I don't write my comics to pitch to TV. I write them because I want to write and draw those stories. But the fact that we're fortunate enough to live in an era where a lot of comics are being adapted to other media. Having that happen would give me the freedom to spend more time writing and drawing stories. I would not be averse to pursuing it for novelization, but the publishing market is in such flux right now. Whether you're an indie publisher or you actually have a publishing deal, it's still really hard for authors to make a profit from their works. And my whole thing is I'm much more. My goals are twofold. either to retain the creative control over what I develop, or if I'm going to license it out, um, give someone else the right to develop another media, it has to be something that's going to be lucrative for me, because that financial benefit will allow me to focus that much more on just writing direct comics. And right now, the way the publishing landscape is shifting, we don't know where things are transforming, but I can't necessarily see a deal being given. For me, being like very early in my career, I can't see a deal being given to me that's so lucrative that I would, give a whole lot of rights to a novelization of the book. I mean, if anything, what made me really happy is to have the comic developed into like a film or a TV series, and then when you go to the bookstore, that you see the graphic novel there. Like I would be cool with having a novelization in addition to it. But it's almost like I would like the comic to be the novelization, much the way with The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, each time a new volume of The Walking Dead comes out, more and more people are jumping on board with it. The comic book, the graphic novel, is the novelization. That said, there have been prose Walking Dead novels. I think that there's a 3-part novel that tells the origin of a character named the Governor. He's like the main villain on I think maybe the 3rd or 4th season. I'm not sure because I've only watched the first season of The Walking Dead, and I've watched a few episodes of season 2. But it's only for the longest time I had read the comic books, so I just had other things I was working on. I'm like, well, I'll get back to watching when I have a chance. Now they've passed what I've read in the comics. I'm like, all right, I guess I should get caught up on the show and the comic now. Again, really rambling long answers to, no, I hadn't considered novelization before. Yes, I would consider it, but I wouldn't consider it more. I would consider it in terms of how is it going to benefit my profile as a creator and how it's going to benefit me financially. I would honestly look at it as a business decision rather than a creative decision.
Oh, you're done. You're just rambling on. Sorry, bad joke. No, I love that you are, because, not that I've had this experience yet, but, if I talk to people and they're expecting me to give everything for the conversation, I hate that. So I love talking to people, especially for interviews, where they want to contribute a lot. That way it puts less pressure on me to try to make them look good. You make yourself look good. So what tools and resources do you use to write and draw?
My tools. Well, for writing, I use a word processor program called Beam. It's a free software for the Mac. I like it because it's a really stripped down word processor. For some reason, when I run Microsoft Office on my machine, it seems to take a long time to open files, it seems to lag. I've had an update, and so it feels clunky in ways that it doesn't need to be clunky. It's cool that everyone uses, but Beam is very stripped down, and it can open Word documents, it can open all major word processor files. So I just open it up and start typing, much like the way you said that you use Notepad. It has a little bit more formatting than Notepad, but it's still really stripped down, and I can just open and go. My tools for making art. Oh, wow.
Crayons?
I'm trying to, because the problem is that I'm trying to think of the clearest, simplest answer, because I actually have a pretty elaborate process in making my art, and to walk you through it would be another like 5-minute ramble. The quickest thing is to say that I draw my actual colorful pages in India ink with brush. I use a couple of different sizes of brushes to kind of mimic, to give me different line weights. Some people that are really experienced in drawing with an ink brush can use a really thick brush, like a large brush, to get like really thin lines. But I haven't developed the hand control of that tool to the point yet that I can do that. So I realized, well, I just use a variety besides the brushes you saw when I want. It's one of those things where it's kind of a common sense no-brainer, and a lot of experienced inkers do use a wide variety of brush sizes anyway. But the way I approached inking comic books was I would keep trying to learn how to ink with a brush every couple of years, wouldn't get good results, and get frustrated. Because I would just try to pick that one really nice big brush and try to get a wide variety of lines out of it. So now, it's a lot of brush and India ink on Bristol boards. But those Bristol boards, I actually will print out my rough sketches onto those Bristol boards, and then I'll ink directly on top of that. So, you know, it's my computer, Photoshop, draw rough layouts in pencil with like on vellum. And then the brush and the ink. Those are my tools of my trade.
All right, so give us a character, whether it's in your writing, ideas in your head, books, movies, TV show. Choose a character and tell us about this character and why you really like them.
Well, I think I mentioned before in Morningstar there's a character, this female archangel, Ariel. She's become my favorite character in the series. Originally, that character, she's the wife of a character who was captured by these demons that live in heaven, or on the outskirts of heaven. They're creatures that were created before the angels. They're sort of like, you know, the first pass. They didn't quite come out right. They'll have faith. These monstrous creatures. And the whole thing that at the beginning of the story is that there's an ongoing battle between the archangels and these creatures. They're constantly trying to pick off the angels because they feel angry. They've been cast out to the void and darkness because God created them. They didn't come out right. So he's just tossed them away. And they're pissed because these angels get to live in this beautiful paradise that God created for them. You know, that should have been ours. It's not our fault that we came out early. Anyway, originally, there was a character that, I'm blanking on his name right now, but the original archangel that I had was a male character. He got captured by these demons. And they actually have this ritual where they capture, well, they basically capture angels and they feed on their blood. They're kind of like vampires. And they had basically infected this archangel. And it started to drive him crazy. But he became sort of like, his reaction was less about like being a vampire and more sort of like a drug addict. Like he needed more of this brew that the demons created. When I switched and killed that character off and put Ariel, this female character, in his place, what changed was that she went from just being this woman who was going to be a love interest from Lucifer to now she is a single mom who is raising a child. And she's running this saloon that was just sort of like, it's like a meeting place in heaven. It's called the Morningstar Tavern. You know, Morningstar Saloon, named after Lucifer because he's their leader. The man who was her husband was, you know, like one of Lucifer's best friends. Well, they're all pretty tight. But she's now running this business, raising her child. Because of the anger at her husband being killed by these monsters, she's now joined Lucifer in their war against these demons. And she's doing all of this, and then she gets captured, and the same thing happens to her that I was going to have happen to her husband, where she becomes infected with this hunger. You know, and it starts driving her slowly crazy. But the idea of dealing with her as somebody who has a substance abuse problem while being a single mom and she's trying to run this business, keep her life together, fight these creatures that killed her husband. She's like, she just has all this stuff piled on top of her. And then she has this addiction problem that she didn't ask for. This addiction problem that was thrust upon her by her enemies. She became this incredibly strong woman. Like, I like strong female characters. And it's just like, she's strong, but you can see that she's going down a dark path. And I think she's one of the first characters I've ever created that really, really felt human to me, but didn't come from me. Because in Eye of the Gods, the characters in some way are all analogs with people that I've known in my life. With this, it was me really trying to create characters to pull plot out of my imagination. To have this person who was so strong, but was still flawed, and was going to get worse before it was over. I kind of fell in love with her as a character. She just felt so compelling and real and tough and fragile at the same time. So that's probably, I think she's probably the best character I've created to date, which sucks in the fact that she's not the character of the book. But I think in the same way that they say that a hero is only as good as their villains, if Lucifer is the main story of this character, he's only as compelling as the heroes that are around him. So that would probably be my character Ariel from Morningstar. It's probably like, I think, when I think of what's my favorite character right now, that's probably right.
And does she lose her voice so she can make it with a man?
That I will keep that hidden until the end of the story.
Okay, so what's up?
There's some twists and turns.
What milestones do you have set for yourself? What goals do you want to accomplish as a graphic artist and writer?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm not accomplishing the goal that I want to accomplish, which is to publish a graphic novel every year. Part of that is that I originally tried to write Morningstar as a 4-issue miniseries. And that's enough material to publish a graphic novel. So I was thinking 4 issues a year. But then in the rewriting of the story, it ended up being like I couldn't cram everything I wanted into 4 issues. So it ended up being 6. And then I was like, I still wanted to have this big epic fight scene at the end, which pushed it to 7. And 7 would have been a good stopping point, but I also wanted it to be sort of like 4 issues and 4 issues. So I thought, well, why don't I just let the story breathe instead of trying to cram everything in? And so it kind of filled out to naturally make 8 issues altogether, with the actual final war in heaven like spanning one whole issue. But my goal in terms of my publishing is to put out a graphic novel a year, which I have not done yet. And again, that really comes down to the number of hours in the day of working my day job and not being able to work on my concept anywhere near as much as I'd like. And beyond that, just figuring out how to make my publishing model profitable enough that I can just write and draw comics full time. That's it. Those are my goals.
Oh, that's awesome of a goal to have. I mean, I'm much like you, where just having a book on Amazon. I mean, I still one day want to have a book on a bookshelf, but the fact that I completed a book and it's open for the market for people to buy it, I mean, that's my dream right there. And just being able to do that over and over and over again, that's enough of a dream to keep me going forward. Now, if I somehow make a living at this, that would be awesome. But even if I fail in the career of writing, at the very end of it, I can say, you know what? I got something out there. So what tips do you have for others wanting to do a graphic novel the way you have?
I would say make a rough draft of both the art and the writing, and then use that as a starting point to build the proper thing, the final book. And I say that because a lot of times I told you the journey I went through where I started. I worked on the first chapter.
Need you to speak up.
Um, I mentioned before earlier about how I started working on the first chapter of Eye of the Gods, found story problems I hadn't figured out, and then had to go back and restructure the whole thing. I think that rough draft of both the art and the writing and being able to look at it as a story will stop you from, it'll solve two problems. Problem one is waiting till you have each page perfect before you move on to the next one. It'll allow you to just sort of make the whole thing whole and see it. And the other thing is it'll stop you from going blindly forward and getting to something that you're really not happy with at the end. So I would say just rough sketch the whole thing out, letter the whole thing out, and then just edit that thing and look at that really rough, raw skeleton and just build on top of it and reinforce it and revise it and then draw it.
Now, you being a man, or at least I assume you're a man, I mean, the overshadow here does help with that. How do you accomplish writing female characters? How do you go about getting in their minds? Yeah, how do you go about getting in their minds being a male yourself and not being familiar with how a female thinks?
I asked that question of a close female friend of mine when I first started writing this series. And it was a big concern of mine when I intentionally decided to add a lot more female characters in the book. And what she told me was, don't try to write strong female characters. Try to write strong characters. Treat them as people first, and then let who they are, let what they are inform who they are, not lead it. Because, I mean, I've known women that have very masculine personalities and they can act a lot like guys. And I've known guys that have some traits that would be considered very feminine. If you make a character that thinks and acts like a guy, the bad way is to simply just take a male character and slap some boobs and long hair on them. A good way is if you can actually justify through backstory and through her actions, her worldview and how she came to become the person that she is. Maybe it's something where she comes from a military family and her dad always treated her like a boy. Maybe it's something where she's just naturally a tomboy. Maybe she's a female character that has traits that some guy might have. That's like she's just geeky and nerdy, and she's into gaming, which traditionally has been sort of a boys' playground. But now there's so many female gamers out there that she's just into a lot of pop culture stuff that would be considered male. So it's not necessarily that you're making her a guy. You're just making her into things. Her personality is someone where she shares a lot of traits that some males may share. That doesn't make her necessarily just a guy in a woman's body. And I think once you get beyond the surface traits, then it gets into who is this person at their core as a human being, separate from gender. What are their motivations? What do they really want? And after that, I mean, all you do is just try and create a person who feels real to you. And if you create this character and they don't feel like a real person, then it's not really a matter that they don't feel like a real woman or a real man. They don't feel like a real person. And then I think for both men and women, it's good to have someone of the opposite gender to give you feedback. Because there could definitely be, that's the other thing, is having that beta reader who can come in and look at your work and say, this doesn't feel authentic and this is why. Having people in your life who can say that. So a lot of it is, to sum up, trying to make this look a real character first and foremost, real person first and foremost regardless of gender. Then having someone of that gender who can look at it who you trust, whose opinion you trust, and who you feel can authentically tell you where places where you're falling short, or things that you should have that you're neglecting.
Yeah, I definitely can see that, and it's kind of an approach that I sort of take. I have a very clear understanding of what gender my characters are going to be right when I create them, but sometimes I change their gender if need be. But nothing really changes about who they are. It's just that, there's some traits that females have that males don't, and males versus females. Um, keep trying to hold back the coughing, just makes it worse. But in my novel that I often allude to having written, but I'm not ready to release it yet, the main character is a female. And she is a badass kind of female, but when I wrote her, I'm like, okay, what kind of character is she? What is her background and what makes her the person that she is? And then once I figured that out, then I'm like, okay, so let's add the female element to it. Not to say that she still couldn't be the same person as a male, but there are going to be certain things that she has as a male than as a female. And one of the criticisms that I've gotten so far is early in the story, she's a bounty hunter. Okay. And she catches her mark and is escorting him back to her vehicle so she can leave the planet, and ends up getting ambushed. And she's able to escape, but not before witnessing the death of her mark. And she's like scared for her life, and she runs as hard as she can. She doesn't stay and fight because she's seriously outnumbered. And, she just keeps running and finally gets away from it, takes a moment to like rest and just contemplate everything. And I described that she's crying. She's crying about the whole ordeal, watching someone die in front of her. And I got criticized by this, but some of my beta readers, because it's like, well, she's supposed to be this badass person, that she has killed in the line of duty and all of that, and then you have her sitting here crying about the whole ordeal, and it's like it's a little sexist that you're doing that, and I'm like, well, I didn't do it because it was because she was a female necessarily. Just because she's killed doesn't mean that it doesn't still affect her. It affects anyone who kills. But I actually got the idea from a movie called Gridiron Gang. I think that's what it was. It starred The Rock, which was based on a true story. But in the movie, these juvenile delinquents are put into a football game, and they play their first game and they lose. And they end up crying. I mean, these people that have committed these awful crimes are crying because they've lost a game. And, some people didn't believe it, but there's actual footage of this actually happening. People kind of sobbing up. And it's been explained that the reason why they were crying is because they've never faced those kind of emotions before. So when I wrote that this character was crying, it wasn't because she was a female. It's because she witnessed something that really affected her. And maybe if the character was male, maybe I wouldn't say that he was crying, but maybe he was punching walls. Maybe he was turning his sadness and this event into anger, which men are more prone to do. Not that women don't, but women tend to turn the other way and cry. So, yeah, that's one of the hardest things for writing a female character is, are you doing it because she's female, or are you doing it because that's just the appropriate response to it?
Well, you know what's funny, because in the example that you just gave, I was just thinking how
Speak up.
in the example that you just gave, I was thinking about how it actually would seem very, very compelling to me if it were a male bounty hunter and a male bounty hunter were crying, simply because we don't see men tapping into that part of their emotions very often. The idea of feeling, honestly, I was thinking just when you first started telling it, I wasn't even thinking about that being defeated thing. I was just thinking about the adrenaline rush, because I can remember being a kid in high school, and I didn't get into big fights after about like just watching other kids I knew that got into fights. Like you see big tough kids, and during a fight, guys would be crying because it's just an emotional rush, during a fight. Now, a trained bounty hunter would probably not necessarily have the same reaction, but I was thinking about how interesting it would be to just have a guy who's in that state where, going through an act of violence, just the emotions and the adrenaline cause him to cry. It's not even about happiness or sadness. It's just raw emotion. And I mean, it's a tough thing to play if you're doing something you're like. One of the things I often do is I look at a scene. If I have I will gender swap as a mental check when I have a scene. If a character's doing, I'm like, well, what would I have happen here if this was a female character with a male character? And I try not to put my female characters into a situation I would not put my male character. Now, a female character is going to handle it differently than a male character. That's true. But I tried, I'm not saying I'm expert at this, because there's places. The reason why I try to make more of an effort at it is because I feel like there's places where I've fallen down in past works. And I'm trying to treat my male and female characters more equally. So sometimes I'll have a scene and I'll say, well, how would this scene play out for a male character instead of a female character? And if I'm like, well, I wouldn't do that to a male character, I'm like, well, that means that I need to think about why I'm putting this female character in this situation. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to put her in the same situation. It means I'm going to have to work harder to justify why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think that's the tough work there, because a lot of times we don't want to just blanket say, this is what I'm doing and this is why, blah blah blah. We want things to be nuanced and subtle. We want people to leave space for the reader to infer what the character is thinking and feeling, instead of just blatantly telling them. And that's the hard work.
Well, actually, you gave me something to think about with my scene, and I'm surprised that I didn't see it before. The adrenaline drop, because her adrenaline would have been pumping very hard. The fight or flight response, getting away, having that kind of a drop could also have an effect on her emotions. I'm debating if I want to cut it out of the scene. I can understand the criticisms that I've received for it, but it's giving me something new to think about, that if I keep it in there, maybe try to not specifically say her adrenaline is dropping, but kind of show the symptoms of it so you understand why she's crying. I mean, the traumatic event, yes, and maybe she's better trained at handling it, but adding the adrenaline drop, I think, does resolve that issue. I thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, and we finally have reached the end of our interview, where I ask you, is there anything else you want to discuss?
Wow. Well, I've discussed so much. We'll do what Morningstar is about. Who I the Gods is about. I guess the only other thing I can tell you is just that where my works lie, where they reside online. I've got a website, optichouse.com. That's where I have Eye of the Gods is available on Amazon Kindle. It's available as a digital PDF that people can purchase. It's available as a physical book that people can buy and they ship out. I also have the first 3 issues of Morningstar available. Morningstar is currently available on issues 2 and 3 are currently available only on the Kindle digitally. I recently made them available as PDFs because Amazon Kindle has a 90-day exclusivity period. So, but the exclusivity period has ended recently, so I submitted them to a comic book platform called Comixology. It's an iTunes for comics. Probably the major place people that buy digital comics buy them. So the first issue of Morningstar is available on Comixology also. The other issues are probably going to be available in coming months, just going through their approval process. But also, on my website, optichouse.com, there's a link to my blog. And on my blog, I post a lot of figure drawing sketches from figure drawing classes I take regularly, work in progress photos of my comic pages as I'm doing them, the YouTube videos that I mentioned earlier where I actually record myself as I'm working. It's basically like an online art diary. People can kind of follow what I'm doing. You go to optichouse.com, that's where you can buy the books and art prints and other artwork I'm making. And then if you click on the blog link, you can see what I'm up to on a daily basis. I've got a mailing list on there that people can sign up for. So if you ever ask the question, where do artists get their ideas from, you can actually watch my process of getting ideas and making things and nurturing and developing and sometimes strangling in their cribs. That's pretty much it.
Now, that actually reminded me, did I see that some of your books are in a comic book store itself?
Yes, that is true.
And how was that accomplished?
Well, there's two things. One is the traditional comic book distribution. There's a company called Diamond Comic Distributors. They distribute most of the comic books to comic shops in North America, Canada, and the UK. They basically publish a catalog every month. It lists what books are going to be coming out 3 months from now. So what happens is every month retailers get these books, these catalogs, they review it, they pick out how many they want of Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Hellboy, whatever different series they want to order. And they have all the major publishers plus indie publishers. They submit their orders, and then 3 months later, the books show up. The way I got my books in is I simply emailed Diamond and asked what their submission process was. They have a submission form on their website. You send them as much of your project as you have done, along with a brief description and a few other forms you have to fill out. They have a board that evaluates what new books they're going to carry. They really only deal with more indie publishers because with Marvel and DC, the books are kind of vetted by Marvel and DC editorial. So whatever Marvel and DC put out, they're going to carry. So they don't need to review that. I submitted my book. They reviewed it. They accepted it. I had already gotten the book printed up because I had been selling print copies at comic conventions for a year prior. So I just shipped them a couple of cases of the books that I had from my own store, from my own storehouse, and they shipped them off to from their distribution hub to individual comic shops. So that's how Eye of the Gods ended up in different comic shops. Morningstar is a different case. I have not submitted Morningstar to Diamond Distributors. And the reason for that is because with the day job, I'm not able to finish it on a regular schedule. I can't say I'm going to have issue 1 done this month, issue 2 done this month, issue 3 done this month. I have to kind of finish them as I can. And that's a really hard hit for comic book shops to take because, they're all small independent bookstores. There's a few comic book chains, but very few. For the most part, they're all mom and pop operations, and they need to know that what they're ordering is something they can sell. So even if they really love and even if they really want to support indie comics, they still have to spend their dollars on the names that they know. So aside from all the X-Men, Batman, Spider-Man books, they're going to pick an indie book. Odds are they're going to take The Walking Dead or something like Saga, which is a really popular science fiction comic book coming out right now from Image, or Hellboy from Dark Horse. Those are all books that they're much more likely to pick because they know that these books are going to come out on a particular schedule. So what I decided is I was going to wait until all of Morningstar is done the whole series before I start approaching comic book retailers. Therefore, usually I only sell them at comic book conventions myself, or I'll sell them through my website. However, I've been fortunate enough, as I've been traveling the country doing some comic conventions, I've met a few retailers that are interested in carrying the book. They're really supportive of indie comic creators, and they have the operating budget that they can carry a couple of books for someone, even if they aren't certain the new issues coming next month or a month after that. If there's only a couple issues a year. One of those stores is Meltdown Comics in Los Angeles. They're one of the larger stores in the LA area. I did a in-store event that they had at the show at the store it was sometime last year. And in doing that, I met the person who handled their ordering, and she said they'd be interested in carrying it. So they carry a small run of the books, issues 1 through 3. There's another store I met in Chicago, First Aid Comics. I didn't meet them in Chicago. I met them at in Minnesota. I did the Wizard World Minnesota. Been doing a lot of traveling the past few months. But First Aid Comics in Chicago, I met the owner of the store there. He checked out my books, but thought they were really good. Their store in Chicago, they got a large African American customer base, so they thought we want to get some books by black creators in there. So I was like, well, hell, I'll take any reason. I'll put the risk card to get my comics in the store. No, he genuinely liked the material, and so they bought a couple of copies of Morning Star as well as Island Gods, and they're carrying that. So that's how that occurred. It's really just attending conventions, getting my book in front of retailers, getting in front of people that are interested in carrying it. And I always let them know that I'm not publishing it on a monthly schedule, that I'm publishing it sort of like, around my day job work schedule. And as long as they're okay with that, then I'm more than happy to get it into their hands.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the interview here. It's been the longest interview I've had so far. Not that I'm complaining. I love it, but it's going on about 3 hours now. Well, I've run out of questions to ask anyway, so it's a good place to stop. So I thank you, Gerimi, for doing this, and I had a really great time interviewing you today.
Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it. I had fun too. Thank you for having me. It's been a really pleasurable and stimulating conversation.
Well, that's what I aim for, at least for myself. I mean, if you have one, well, kudos, but So below, you're going to, people who are watching this, you're going to see the text interview, the standard one that I do for everyone. And below that, you're going to actually, Gerimi has donated a couple of pages of his comics for you to see his artwork and his narrative style. So definitely check those out, and then links below that for how to find Gerimi's website and his various works. I also want to remind people for the month of July that I am holding a contest right now as a way of thank you to all the people who have made my blog successful, at least in viewership, that there is a contest going on right now where you can win a copy of both my books and my book that's coming out, the 14th Century Vampire Story I told you about, as well as the last person I interviewed before this one, Kimberly Daniels. She is releasing a copy of her book, all for free. So if you want to get these books, go up top to contests and go down to Madness giveaway and just leave a message there. And I will pick a winner from the people who leave messages there. And the more people who leave messages there, the more prizes will be available. So, all right, so that does it for me. And once again, thank you, Gerimi. I wish you all of the luck, and I really hope that I think Morning Star sounds like a fantastic story, and I hope it really makes you an international star.
Well, thank you, you and me both. I really appreciate it. And thanks again for having me. This has been a blast.
All right. Take care.
All right, you too.